The tow truck driver slammed the lever down, and the metal chains tightened around the axle of Gary's beloved Ford F-150. Gary sprinting out of the front door without his shoes on was the exact reaction I had predicted when I signed the title transfer an hour ago. He screamed at the driver to stop, but the man just pointed a calloused thumb toward me standing on the porch. I took a sip of my coffee and watched my husband's face turn from confusion to absolute horror as he locked eyes with me. He charged up the driveway screaming that I was insane and demanding to know what the hell I thought I was doing. I didn't flinch when he got in my face because the adrenaline of his betrayal had already burned away my fear. I tossed the empty bank envelope at his chest, and it fluttered to the concrete between us like a dead bird. He looked down at the logo of the bank where he had emptied my late father's inheritance account this morning. The color drained from his face faster than the balance had drained from my savings. He started stammering that he could explain and that it wasn't what it looked like, but the truck was already rolling down the street. I told him that since he decided to unilaterally invest my $50,000 into his brother's failed crypto scheme, I decided to liquidate his assets. He tried to grab my arm to drag me inside, but I stepped back and pulled my phone out to show him the divorce lawyer I was dialing. His mother pulled up to the curb just in time to see her precious son's truck disappearing around the corner. She rushed out of her car screaming that I was a gold digger and a thief, while Gary crumpled onto the porch steps with his head in his hands. I walked past him to meet her on the lawn because I was done being the passive wife who kept the peace. She started waving her finger in my face talking about how marriage is a partnership and I had no right to touch his property. I laughed out loud and told her that since Gary forged my signature to access my trust fund, I figured forgery was the new family tradition. She froze mid-sentence and her jaw dropped as she looked back at her son who was refusing to make eye contact. I pulled the copy of the wire transfer receipt from my back pocket and shoved it into her hand. She read the recipient name, which wasn't his brother like he claimed, but was actually his ex-girlfriend Jessica. The silence on the lawn was louder than the tow truck engine had been moments ago. Gary finally looked up with tears in his eyes and begged me not to make a scene in front of the neighbors. I pointed to Mrs. Higgins watching from her window across the street and told him the scene started when he stole my future. I turned around and walked into the house while locking the deadbolt behind me before he could scramble up the steps. He pounded on the door screaming that this was his house too, and I couldn't lock him out. I leaned against the door and yelled back that according to the deed my father paid for this house is mine, and he is just a guest. I walked into the kitchen and saw the pile of packing boxes I had stashed in the pantry while he was at the gym. I started throwing his clothes into the boxes with zero regard for folding or fragility. His Gibson Les Paul guitar was sitting on the stand in the living room, and I stared at it for a solid 10 seconds. I didn't smash it because I knew I needed leverage for when the legal battle started, but I definitely thought about it. My phone buzzed with a text from Gary saying he was calling the police because I stole his truck. I replied with a photo of the bill of sale signed by him dating back to last year when he put the truck in my name for insurance fraud reasons. He read the text, and the pounding on the door stopped instantly as he realized he had played himself. I dragged the first box of his clothes to the garage and hit the button to open the door. He was standing in the driveway with his mother whispering furiously into his ear while pointing at the house. They both looked up as the garage door rolled open, and I kicked the box down the driveway. It burst open, and his designer shirt spilled out onto the oil-stained concrete. His mother shrieked and ran to gather the clothes like I had just tossed a baby out the door. Gary walked towards me slowly with his hands up like he was approaching a wild animal. He started using his soft voice, the one he used when he wanted to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. He said, "Baby, please just listen. I was going to put the money back before you even noticed." I asked him how he planned to replace $50,000 on a junior manager salary in 2 days. He stuttered and looked at his mother for help, which was his default setting whenever reality hit him. She stood up holding his shirts and yelled that family helps family, and I was being selfish for hoarding money while Jessica was struggling. My blood ran cold because that confirmed she knew about the transfer and probably encouraged it. I asked her why my money was being used to help his ex-girlfriend, who supposedly moved to Texas 3 years ago. Gary lunged forward to stop her from answering, but he was too slow and too desperate. She blurted out that Jessica was alone with a baby and Gary had a responsibility to help his own blood. The world stopped spinning for a second as the words hit me harder than the tow truck could have. I looked at Gary and saw the guilt written all over his sweaty, pale face. He wasn't investing in crypto or helping his brother, he was paying child support for a secret family. I didn't scream or cry, I just felt a cold wave of clarity wash over my entire body. I pressed the button to close the garage door while maintaining eye contact with him until the metal barrier slammed shut. I ran to the master bedroom and grabbed the suitcase I had already packed just in case my suspicions were right. I heard the glass of the back patio door shatter as he threw a garden gnome through it to get inside. I locked the bedroom door and dragged the dresser in front of it before calling 911. I told the operator that my estranged husband had broken into the house, and I feared for my safety. He was banging on the bedroom door screaming that I misunderstood and it wasn't his baby. I yelled through the wood that his mother seemed pretty sure it was his blood, and mothers usually know. He started sobbing and hitting the door rhythmically while apologizing over and over again. I sat on the edge of the bed looking at the wedding photo on the nightstand and smashed it face down. Sirens wailed in the distance, coming closer with every heartbeat thumping in my ears. I heard him scramble away from the door, probably trying to hide whatever evidence he had in his office. I moved the dresser and opened the bedroom door just as the blue lights flashed through the front window. I walked into the hallway and saw him frantically stuffing papers into his backpack in the office. He looked up at me and said, "We can fix this if you just send the police away and calm down." I told him there is no we anymore, and the police are here to escort him out of my property. The officers knocked loudly on the broken front door, identifying themselves with authority. I walked to the living room where the shattered glass covered the rug and opened the front door. Gary came running out with his hands up, playing the victim, immediately saying it was a domestic dispute. The officer looked at the broken glass and then at me standing there calmly with my arms crossed. I told the officer I wanted him removed for trespassing and destruction of property immediately. Gary tried to pull the husband card saying he lives here and it was an accident. I showed the officer the deed and the restraining order application I had printed out while waiting for the tow truck. The officer asked Gary to step outside while they sorted out the residency situation. His mother was still in the driveway screaming at the second officer about how I was abuse and mentally unstable. I watched from the broken doorway as Gary was patted down and questioned by the police. He kept pointing at me and shaking his head, trying to spin a narrative that was falling apart. The officer came back to me and said since he had established residency, they couldn't kick him out without an eviction order unless I pressed charges for the break-in. I looked Gary dead in the eye and said I want to press full charges for vandalism and breaking and entering. Gary's eyes went wide because he never thought I would actually go through with ruining his record. The officer nodded and pulled out the handcuffs while Gary started screaming my name. His mother tried to grab the officer's arm and was immediately warned to step back or she would be arrested too. They walked Gary to the squad car while he cried like a child who got caught stealing candy. I felt nothing but a hollow satisfaction as his head ducked under the door frame of the police cruiser. The officer gave me a case number and told me to get the restraining order filed first thing in the morning. I nodded and thanked him as they drove away, leaving me alone with a broken door and a destroyed marriage. His mother stood in the driveway glaring at me with pure hatred radiating from her eyes. She spat on the ground and hissed that I would pay for humiliating her family like this. I told her the only thing I would be paying for is the paternity test to prove her son is a liar. She got in her car and peeled out, leaving tire marks on the asphalt that matched the chaos in my life. I went inside and grabbed a trash bag to start cleaning up the glass from the patio door. Every shard of glass I picked up felt like a piece of the life I thought I had built with him. My phone started blowing up with texts from his brother asking why Gary was in jail. I blocked his number without reading the rest and went to the kitchen to pour a drink. I found a sticky note on the fridge that Gary had left this morning saying, "Love you, mean it." I ripped it off and crumpled it into a tight ball before throwing it in the trash with the glass. I sat at the kitchen island and opened my laptop to check the bank account one more time. The balance was still zero, and seeing it again made the anger flare up hotter than before. I logged into the joint email account that he forgot I had access to and searched for Jessica. Dozens of emails popped up going back 2 years, including pictures of a toddler that looked exactly like Gary. There were receipts for Airbnb stays and flight confirmations for trips he said were work conferences. I downloaded every single file and saved them to an external hard drive before he could delete them. I found an email chain between Gary and his mother discussing how to hide the child from me permanently. She had advised him to slowly siphon money from our savings so I wouldn't notice a large lump sum. Reading her words made me realize this wasn't just a mistake, it was a calculated conspiracy against me. I printed the emails out because I knew his lawyer would try to claim this was a one-time slip-up. The house was too quiet, so I turned on the TV just to have some background noise while I planned my next move. I knew he would make bail by tomorrow morning, so I had to secure the house tonight. I called the locksmith who offered 24-hour emergency service and told him to come immediately. While waiting, I went into his office and started going through his filing cabinet systematically. I found a credit card statement from a bank I didn't know we did business with hidden under old tax returns. The limit was maxed out at $20,000 with charges at baby stores and jewelry shops. I realized he had been building debt in secret while spending my liquid cash to keep his credit score clean. The locksmith arrived, and I had him change every single lock, including the garage and the side gate. I paid him extra to install a heavy-duty strike plate on the back door where the glass was broken. After he left, I pushed the heavy oak bookshelf against the broken door just to be safe. I couldn't sleep, so I spent the night boarding up the broken window with plywood from the garage. Morning came slowly, and the sun rising felt like a spotlight on the wreckage of my life. I showered and put on my best suit because today was war and I needed armor. I drove to the courthouse before it opened and waited on the steps with my folder of evidence. I filed the restraining order and the divorce petition simultaneously, checking the box for sole use of the property. As I walked out of the courthouse, I saw Gary's brother standing by my car, looking menacing. He asked me if I was happy now that I ruined Gary's life over a little misunderstanding. I told him a secret child and $50,000 is not a misunderstanding, it is a felony. He laughed and said Gary was just trying to do the right thing and I should be supportive. I got in my car and locked the doors before he could get any closer to my window. He kicked my bumper as I backed out, and I made a mental note to add that to the file. My lawyer called and said Gary had been released and was likely heading to the house to get his things. I told her the locks were changed and the police were on speed dial, so he was welcome to try. I decided not to go home yet because I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I went to the bank instead and spoke to the fraud department manager in person. I showed him the proof that Gary had forged my signature on the withdrawal slip. The manager looked horrified and immediately froze the accounts while launching an internal investigation. He told me depending on the outcome, they might be able to reverse the transaction since it was fraud. Leaving the bank, I felt a tiny glimmer of hope that I might not be destitute after all. I drove past the house and saw Gary's mother's car parked in the driveway blocking the garage. They were banging on the front door, and I could see Gary holding a crowbar. I didn't stop, I just kept driving and called the police again to report an active break-in attempt. I parked down the street and watched as two patrol cars rolled up silently without sirens. They caught Gary mid-swing with the crowbar prized against my freshly installed deadbolt. This time the officers didn't listen to his sob story about living there. They saw the damage to the door and the restraining order that was now in the system. They cuffed him again, and this time his mother was cuffed too for assisting him. I watched from my rearview mirror as they were both loaded into separate police cars. I finally drove up to the driveway and got out just as the neighbors came outside to watch. I waved to Mrs. Higgins, who gave me a thumbs up and shouted that she got it all on video. I walked into my house, which was now safe again, but felt emptier than ever before. I sat down on the floor in the middle of the living room and finally let myself cry. But the tears didn't last long because my phone rang with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it, and a woman's voice asked, "Is this the wife of Gary Reynolds?" I said yes, and she said, "Hi, my name is Jessica, and I think we need to talk." My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized this was the other woman calling me directly. I asked her how she got my number, and she said Gary gave it to her years ago for emergencies. She sounded tired and not at all like the villain I had constructed in my head. She said she had no idea Gary took my money, and she thought he was a successful investor. She told me he had promised her he was divorced, and that I was his crazy ex-wife who wouldn't leave. The audacity of his lies was so massive it was almost impressive in a sick, twisted way. I put her on speaker and grabbed my laptop to start recording the conversation. I asked her to repeat everything he had told her about me and about where the money came from. She said he claimed the $50,000 was his bonus from work and he wanted to buy the baby a nursery. I laughed bitterly and told her that money was my dead father's life insurance payout. She gasped and started crying, saying she didn't want stolen money and she would send it back. I was stunned because I expected a fight, but instead I was getting an ally. I told her if she returned the money, I wouldn't include her in the lawsuit I was preparing. She agreed immediately and said she was done with Gary and his lies. We spent the next hour comparing notes and realizing he had played both of us for fools. She sent me screenshots of their texts where he called me a burden and said he only married me for the house. Reading those words hurt more than the theft because I had loved him with everything I had. I thanked Jessica and hung up feeling a strange sense of solidarity with the woman who ruined my marriage. I checked my bank app an hour later and saw a pending transfer for $45,000. She kept $5,000, which I figured was fair rent for dealing with his genetic material. With the money back and the house secure, I felt like I could finally breathe. I called my lawyer and told her to add adultery and fraud to the divorce petition. She said with the evidence I had, he wouldn't get a dime of the house or my assets. I spent the weekend cleaning the house and purging every trace of Gary from my life. I donated his clothes to a shelter and sold his guitar to a pawn shop for cash. Monday morning, I went to work and told my boss everything because Gary worked in the same building. My boss was shocked and called HR immediately to revoke Gary's security clearance pending investigation. When Gary showed up to work after making bail again, he was escorted out by security. He stood in the parking lot screaming at my window that I was trying to destroy him. I just closed the blinds and went back to work focusing on rebuilding my career. 3 months later, we were in mediation, and he looked like a shadow of the man I married. He tried to argue that he deserved half the house equity because he mowed the lawn. My lawyer laughed and slid the stack of emails and bank statements across the table. Gary signed the papers giving me everything just to avoid going to trial for fraud. I walked out of that office a divorced woman with a house, a full bank account, and a bright future. His mother tried to sue me for emotional distress, but the judge threw it out and fined her for frivolous filing. I heard through the grapevine that Jessica sued Gary for child support, and he is working 2 jobs to pay it. Sometimes I sit on my porch and drink coffee watching the sunset, feeling peace instead of anxiety. I still have trust issues and I check my bank accounts every single morning out of habit. But I learned that I am stronger than I ever thought, and I will never let anyone blindside me again. I kept the restored truck title framed on my wall as a reminder of the day I took my power back. The only thing I regret is not calling the tow truck sooner. Now I am dating a forensic accountant who thinks my financial paranoia is charming and smart. Life is good, but I still wonder if I went too far by getting his mother arrested. She was just protecting her son, even if she was toxic and delusional about his actions. Some people say I should have just left him without scorching the earth and ruining his career. But when I look at my recovered savings, I know I did what I had to do to survive. So Reddit, I need to know, did I take it too far with the arrests and the job loss? Am I the asshole for destroying my cheating husband and his enabler mom?